The Transfiguration of Jesus, Hiroshima Day, World Peace Day. It's a bit of a line-up for one day, is it not? World Peace Day, I imagine, arose in response to the event of Hiroshima Day. The day confronting us with the reality that human ingenuity misused will destroy life as we know it on this planet. The decision to use that technology in that bomb changed the way things are. For there to be future on this planet, peace was no longer an ideological nicety, it was a necessity. At first detonation taking place on Transfiguration Day, when the brilliant light of divine glory overshadowed astonished disciples caught sleeping. On that day, the brilliant light of fractured atom and shade of pluming cloud overshadowed we who were caught napping. Who are we to discern good from evil, we capable agents of death, to act as if we have agency of life? Today we are to speak of peace. But what do we know of peace? When you think of peace and talk of peace, do we do so in terms of what it is not? It is not war, it is not conflict, it is not injustice. If so, then our talk of peace is full of images of not peace, full of images of war and conflict and disruption and dis-ease. What would it actually be like to live with peace? What would the world be like without the tension of war and conflict? War and conflict does take life and wastes time and consumes resources for sure. But it also diminishes possibilities and defines the immediate purpose. So for some and for many, it can actually be quite energizing. Those who profit from it continuing are incentivized to do so. And it does provide the rationale for those who work for peace. How can peace shift from being an absence of, a passive counterpart to the act of war, and become a thing we know how to do? The Transfiguration is narrated as a moment in time, revealing a through-time transparency. We could interpret it as Luke validating who Jesus was, his place in continuity and fulfillment of a faith lineage. We could understand it revealing the porosity, that thin veil between the now that we claim as real in historical time and a continuum outside of time in which we're held. Whichever way we do it, or perhaps we don't even think this happened, connectivity through time is presumed. Connection, relationship, responsibility. We might also understand the Transfiguration to reveal the transparent interconnectedness of all of life in creation. Rather than depend only on our resourcefulness to figure out how to live with peace, we humans could learn much from the multitude of the other than human communities of life around us, who live with rather than against life. I happened to be listening to the radio last week and heard the story of the Japanese honeybee. How many of you know the story of the Japanese honeybee? I didn't, but apparently quite a few children do, so this is actually children's talk at this point. The Japanese bee has made a remarkable adaptation in response to its ongoing wrestle with the Japanese hornet. Now, the hornet is a large and dangerous wasp. It is 5 times the size of a honeybee. I can tell you it's 45 millimetres long and has a wingspan of 75 millimetres, for those of you that like measurements. So it's quite a big thing. Both the bee and the hornet have similar types of colonies. They have a queen, they have a nest, and they have larvae that need feeding. It's the job of the worker hornets to find the larvae. The honeybee happens to be a great source of food. When a hornet finds a bee's nest, it kills a few bees and then it leaves a pheromone marker which communicates with the other hornets to come and help out. Now, a honeybee is unable to kill a hornet by stinging or biting or beating it to death. It's simply too small. By contrast, one hornet can kill 40 bees in a minute, and 20 to 30 hornets can kill 30,000 bees in an hour. So it's a real David and Goliath contest here. The thing is, though, that the pheromone marker that the hornet leaves is also recognised by the bee. And once they scent it, they send about 100 bees out to entice the hornet to come into the nest. They run into the nest and the hornet merrily follows along. And then they turn around and they run back to the hornet and they surround it in a ball of bees, about 500 to 1,000 bees. Now remember, they can't bite or sting or do anything physically to pull it to pieces. What they do is they disconnect their wings from their flight muscles. Bees can do this. And they vibrate their flight muscles to generate heat. And they heat up the hornet to the point where it perishes. But the lethal temperature for a hornet is only 2 degrees lower than that for the bee. Hazardous enterprise. This is called thermoballing. If the bees can kill the first few hornets, then the pheromone marker is dissipated, so the other hornets don't come, and the bee nest is saved. Only the Japanese bee colonies have developed this. The European beehives that come into Japan have no hope against the hornet. It is an intriguing evolution. Notice, the solution depends on the bee's knowledge of the hornet. It's also dependent on knowledge of themselves. It is a minutely nuanced knowledge about pheromones, about the lethal temperature for survival, about the ability to separate your flight muscles from your wings. It is a collective solution that is enacted without using weapons, violence, venom, poison, biting, or beating. The focus is not on destroying the hornet colony, but on the action needed to preserve the life of the bee colony. And that's enough. We know in our heads that violence breeds violence. We also know that if our life or our livelihood is threatened, we will act to defend ourselves. Increasingly on our world stage, the "that which threatens" rhetoric is being used to separate us one from another, to disrupt and to divide and to objectify anything that is other as enemy. At the same time, that which is threat, or what the threat is, or what is being threatened, is less and less clear, and it changes according to context. But the emotions that are being stoked and stirred are those stimulated by situations of genuine threat. They are potent and powerful. They are demonizing and dangerous, and what they do is they freeze us in defense mode. We focus on surviving and not on living. So negotiating peaceable outcomes that require us to risk something like relationship are much less likely. Consider again the bee colony. What if our solution is not focused on destroying others, destroying life, but on what is needed for our life's continuity? It requires us to have an intimate knowledge of those who are other, who are threat, to understand how to disempower the triggers that bring destruction. But it also requires us to have an intimate knowledge of ourselves, to understand our responses to that which threatens us, that threatens the continuity of life, and that triggers our destructive responses. And I suspect as we look to one another, we may find that which is other looks very much like us. Of course, in this place, we also have the resource of a faith narrative, and the account of Jacob's wrestle with the figure at night is curiously apt for today. Jacob is returning to meet his brother Esau, from whom he's estranged, and their history of acrimony is mainly because Jacob's a pretty bad dude. He has not been good to his brother. But this wrestle, Karen Armstrong suggests, that we hear about is as much about Jacob being reconciled with himself and his past has been reconciled with Esau and God. Jacob is the first of the patriarchs to make a return journey. From this time forth, it was no longer good enough to get up and go. They had to learn that no one could go forward creatively into the future without having made peace with the past. By facing his brother, Jacob would confront the face of his God, but he would also confront himself. He had to come to terms not only with his brother, but with the Esau within. And only when he confronted those aspects of himself that filled him with fear and disgust could he heal the conflict in his soul and experience the healing power of the divine. Rabbi Eleanor Susskind writes, "Each and every one of us lives in a society that determines our feelings of what is natural, right, and rational. These cultural biases are difficult to examine because they are like water to a fish. They're so ubiquitous and so pervasive we don't notice them. But are the norms of our society so deeply embedded with us that they feel natural, a compass toward what is good?" He suggests that religion offers us a place to stand and examine the cultures in which we live. When we live and breathe the ways of our faith, it gives us a compass by which to measure societal norms as separate from ourselves. In order for us to be able to move into the future and make real creative solutions for peace, we, like Jacob, need to know not only that it is possible, but that it is incredibly important for us to return, to wrestle with face and at least begin to make peace with our propensity to make war. Through being willing to return, to engage wrestling with those things in us that trigger our destructive responses, we may find ourselves wrestling with those we make enemy. As we wrestle with the discomfort of honestly facing who we are, with all we've become, we may find, strangely, the face of God before us. Our God is the one with whom we're embroiled. And Jacob wasn't left unmarked or unaffected by his encounter. He not only went away limping, but he had a new name and a new identity. So if we do this, we may find ourselves redefined. The question is, are we willing to be marked as people who choose to name and act and speak against those who fan decisions and dialogues that provoke division and destruction? Transfiguration, connectivity, collected wisdom shared in time and through time. Are we the ones who listen and learn and take seriously our place, our part, and our responsibility for making peace real in this time, for there to actually be a future time?